Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly ACE Meetup. Today's topic is authentication, and we have Tamara Trejos from the Customer Success Management team here to go through a brief presentation before we actually go ahead and dive into the cloud Q&A with the rest of the panelists. So feel free to go ahead and start typing in your questions at any point throughout the presentation. For any future state or roadmap questions that we may not be able to address here live, don't forget that you can always reach out to your customer success manager for more information. So also keep in mind that the recording will be available on demand on the ACE registration page in about a week or so. So without further ado, take it away, Tamara.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. My name is Tamara, and as Michelle mentioned, I am a customer success engineer. I focus primarily in Citrix Workspace, and that includes Virtual Apps and Desktop Service, and also some of our networking products, such as Citrix ADC. So today's session will be focused on authentication. Here's a brief agenda of what we will be covering. I'm going to talk about some topics pertaining strictly to Citrix Cloud. So this would be on-premises Active Directory, Active Directory Plus token, and Azure Active Directory, and 3 of our actual previews that you can leverage already. This would be Citrix Gateway as an IDP, Octa as an IDP, and cloud-enabled SaaS. I will also briefly cover a couple topics concerning hybrid environments, which leverage Workspace Service or Virtual Apps and Desktop Service, and an on-premises ADC plus storefront. So let's get started with some basic concepts. First, I want to go over some of these terms, which I'll be using throughout this presentation. We have AAA, which refers to Authentication, Authorization, and Auditing. AD, Active Directory. ADC, Citrix ADC, formerly NetScaler. We have AAD, which is the Azure Active Directory. FAS, Federated Authentication Service. IDP, Identity Provider. MFA, Multi-Factor Authentication. SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. SSO, Single Sign-On. TOTP, Time-Based One-Time Password, VDA, Virtual Delivery Agents, and vServer, the virtual server configured in an ADC appliance. So this slide briefly covers our cloud architectural overview. This is basically cloud connectors talking to every other component. Cloud connectors will be required for every cloud-related authentication method or integration, even for hybrid methods, which include on-premises ADCs. Connectors are required for authentication against your AD domain, as these machines will serve as a proxy and connect your environment with Citrix Cloud by talking to your domain controller in order to verify the credentials and authenticate your users as they log in. So all of the methods that I'll describe in the following slides require you to be logged in as an administrator to the Citrix Cloud console. And all of these authentication options can be found in the 2 options that you see here highlighted: Identity and Access Management, and the Workspace Configuration. Identity and Access Management will allow you to configure these options, and the Workspace Configuration will allow you to enable them. So let's jump right into our content. First off, we have on-premises Active Directory. Please keep in mind that by on-premises, I mean any domain controllers, even if they're hosted in a public cloud. This is the simplest form of authentication and the current default when you first install your cloud connectors. So to find this option, again, you need to go to the Identity and Access Management, Authentication tab, Active Directory. If you have not installed your Cloud Connector software, you will be prompted to install them if you click on the ellipsis button and then click on Connect. So when you access this option, you will see a few other options as well that we will be covering in future slides. We have the Active Directory Plus token. Most administrators want an extra authentication method just to have that additional layer of security and not just relying entirely on your users' passwords to be complex and secure enough. So Active Directory Plus token was added as an option to satisfy these needs without having to add more infrastructure to your environment or invest on an IDP. This is included with all of your workspace packages at no additional cost and without the need for any on-premises infrastructure, expertise, or even third-party integrations. So this option is a time-based one-time password. In this authentication method, a token is generated on a user's registered device using an authenticator app. This could be Citrix SSO, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Symantec VIP. We'll talk more about user setup in a minute. But for administrators, this will be available under the Identity and Access Management option and then the Authentication tab. Again, cloud connectors will be required, and once your Active Directory connection is verified, you'll see an option to click on Next. You will see this little option that you can see on the slide. So a configure token option will appear with a checkbox for a single device, and this is selected by default. So this option will enable time-based one-time password, and this is basically the authentication service for the subscription. So you can just save and finish, and then go to the workspace configuration, choose Active Directory plus token, check the box that confirms that you're sure that you want to switch this authentication method, and confirm. And that's all you need to do from an admin perspective. Now, from a user perspective, there are a couple other steps. So users will need to register their account with token in Workspace by providing their email address. They will receive a validation code in their specified email address, which they can use, and just basically add to the Workspace prompt, as you can see over here in the screenshot. The combination of this code and the password is each user's unique secret key. The users must then install an Authenticator app on their mobile devices. Again, any application that complies with industry standards like Citrix SSO, Google or Microsoft Authenticators will do. And then in this Authenticator app, they will be allowed to scan a QR code or manually enter the secret key next to the QR code. An important note is that admins will be able to reset the user devices through the Identity and Management Recovery Wizard. You will see a tab called Recovery, and you can select this and select your domain and search by username and reset the device. When you confirm this, all of the devices specified for that user will be removed. So next we have Active Directory in Azure or Azure AD. By default, Citrix Identity Provider is selected to manage identity information for all users in your Citrix Cloud account, but admins can change this to use Active Directory in Azure instead. So by using Azure AD with Citrix Cloud, you can leverage your own Active Directory and control auditing, password policies, easily disable accounts when needed, configure NFA for a higher level of security, against possibilities of stolen credentials or information of that nature. You can also use federation to an IDP like ADFS, Octa, or Ping. And you can also use a branded sign-in page so your users know that they're signing in at the right place. Citrix Cloud includes an Azure AD app that allows Citrix Cloud to connect with Azure AD without the need for you to be logged into an active Azure AD session. So also please keep in mind that full SSO in Virtual Apps and Desktops VDAs will require FAS, both for on-premises storefront and for Workspace. The Azure AD admin setup is actually really simple. If you're already familiar with Azure, you obviously will need to have an Azure account, and Azure AD is free of charge. You must have global administrator role in Azure AD. So this role is required to give Citrix Cloud your consent to connect with Azure AD, basically. You'll be able to sync accounts using AAD Connect tool or use non-sync accounts with Office 365 email. To set up, you can go again to Identity and Access Management and Authentication tab, click Connect for Azure AD. And when prompted, enter a short URL, which is going to be a friendly identifier for your company, and then you can click on Connect. The identifier you choose must be globally unique within Citrix Cloud. Then you will need to sign in to your Azure account and accept the read-only permissions that Citrix Cloud needs to access the account and acquire the information required for connection. And then you'll be able to add admins using AAD in the Administrators tab as well. For your users to sign in, they will need to use the friendly URL that you configured originally. This is generally in a format of citrix.cloud.com/go/mycompany. And from the Citrix Cloud Sign-In page, you will also see an option that says Sign in with my company credentials. This will actually take you to that Azure portal. So you will need to type the identifier created for your company and then click on Continue. So next, we will jump into our previews. We have Gateway as an identity provider. This is an important feature that just got added to accommodate admins that already had invested in their own IDPs with an on-premises ADC appliance. So a major advantage of using this, the OAuth and OpenID Connect mechanisms, is that the user information is not sent to the hosted applications, and therefore the risk of identity theft is considerably reduced. In the ADC appliance implementation, the application to be accessed is represented by AAA traffic management virtual servers. So to configure OAuth, you must configure an OAuth policy, which must then be associated with a AAA traffic management virtual server. So if you don't have a AAA license for ADC, this option might not be applicable to you. You can acquire a license for that. So in order to use Citrix as an IDP, again, you need to have your ADC license, and your users will authenticate through your existing gateway, even to on-premises virtual apps and desktop service deployments. So you will be able to leverage Citrix Gateway for authentication, authorization, and auditing functions with Citrix Workspace, and use features like pass-through authentication, smart cards, secure tokens, conditional access policies or EPAs, federation, and many others, while providing your users access to the resources they need for Citrix Workspace. This is supported in ADC or Citrix Gateway 12.1, 52.15 and above, ADC and Gateway 13, 36.27 and above. So if you are on an earlier version, you will need to upgrade in order to be able to use this. For you to enable this option, once again, cloud connectors are required. You will see the gateway option in the authentication tab, and you can just select connect. You will need to enter the FQDN of your on-premises gateway and then click detect. And after Citrix Cloud detects it successfully, you will need to click on continue. You can create a connection using your on-premises gateway information. So it will look sort of like that image that we have in there. You will have a client ID, a secret, and redirect URL that Citrix Cloud will display. This information will be used in your cloud policies when you're using ADC configuration. So be sure to download a copy of this information and save it securely offline, because this information is not available in Citrix Cloud after it's been generated. So if you need to, you might need to regenerate this once again. On the gateway side, you can create an OAuth IDP policy using the client ID, secret, and redirect URL. And well, you will need to test and finish. And Citrix Cloud will verify that your gateway is reachable and configured correctly. We will talk a little bit about the ADC configuration on the AAA side. So once again, you will need to have a AAA vServer, create an OAuth IDP profile and a corresponding policy, and bind these policies to the AAA virtual server. Then you will need to bind the certificate globally, test and finish. Something important is that when you're configuring this, you will see an audience field, and this audience field is also going to be the client ID. So you put the client ID in two different places. And well, that's pretty much it. That's the only catch to that. So in the OAuth IDP page, you will just be able to select the policies that you created. You probably will be able to bind the certificate easier if you use CLI. The command for that would be bind VPN and global cert key name and then your certificate key name. All of this you can do both in the GUI and via CLI if that is your preference. And the policies on CLI would be add authentication, OAuth IDP profile, and OAuth IDP policies separately, and then you can just bind those to your virtual server. So we have other tech previews. First, we have Octa as an IDP, and we have cloud-enabled FAS as well. Octa is an IDP for workspaces right now at tech preview. Cloud connectors are required for this. Octa account must be synchronized with Active Directory, and you can leverage features and benefits like multi-factor authentication integrations, conditional policies, and others. Admins can connect their Octa account to Citrix Cloud, and end users will log into Workspace using the Octa sign-in page through Federation. So for the administrator setup, you just need to have your Octa URL, your API token, client ID, and client secret of an OIDC application, and this is OpenID Connect just in case. So if you're interested in testing, please contact your CSM or PM in order to have this enabled. The limitations is that this is not supported for endpoint management at this point in time. We also have a cloud-enabled federated authentication services preview, and this requires Azure AD, Octa, or Gateway, basically any federated IDP. Your admins can connect on-premises FAS deployment to Citrix Cloud. The requirements are the same as regular on-premises FAS, since it requires an on-prem FAS deployment and a cloud role. So the FAS server will be able to communicate to cloud workspace rather than on-premises storefront. And the cloud-enabled FAS is not required for on-premises storefront, therefore. Your end users can achieve SSO to virtual apps and desktops resources when using AAD or Octa. So that means they will no longer get a double login prompt. If this is something that you've experienced in the past, here is the solution for that. So for the administrator setup, you simply download and run a FAS installer, enable it in the Cloud Workspace configuration portal. If you're interested in testing this, please contact your CSM in order to have this preview enabled for you. Okay, so I have a couple other slides that cover on-premises, storefront, and ADC plus cloud. So these are mostly SSO tips. So the LDAP single-factor authentication would be very simple, straightforward. Just keep in mind that if you're using an on-premises storefront, you will need a certificate installed. This will allow for the SSO to actually happen. And then for Azure AD with storefront and on-premises ADC, once again, you will need to have a FAS on-premises, as I mentioned in our previous slide. FAS is basically an enrollment agent which dynamically issues a certificate to users from the Active Directory certificate services, and this allows them to authenticate to Active Directory as if they had a smart card, sort of. So FAS is not an IDP or an SP or service provider, and FAS does not understand or issue SAML tokens. So the configuration requirements are Citrix Storefront minimum version 3.6, server OS and desktop OS VDA, minimum version is 7.9, and you will need to have optionally a Citrix AD gateway if you're using SAML, IDP, or SP to front the storefront servers configured for FAS authentication, but ADC is not required for FAS itself. So if you're going to use SAML as an IDP or as an SP and you do this through an ADC, this is required, obviously. If not, then you don't really need to worry about an ADC. This support article link that you see in here is pretty useful and detailed in terms of what a FAS configuration requires. So you can take a look if this is something that interests you. We also have a quick sneak peek sort of slide, some features that are coming to Citrix Cloud. We will be able to support bring your own SAML. So this is in the works. This will support Active Directory-based SAML-based federation. And we also have AD plus radius. This is a very popular configuration option. This will allow you to connect on-premises or native radius servers to cloud for AD and radius authentication. Some examples are Symantec, RSA, Dual, and so on. These are some popular providers for radius, so you'll be able to integrate those. We also have Google as IDP for Workspace, which will enable Google as an IDP natively in Workspace. And two other interesting options. We have the Citrix Cloud MFA logon, so Citrix Identity plus time-based one-time password, similar to what we talked about AD plus token, but this time for admins to actually log in. And we also will have a Citrix Cloud AD admin, which is basically AD users plus group support for admin logon.
All right, thank you so much, Tamara. Now, before diving into the questions, I have a couple of quick reminders. First, don't forget to check out the new and improved Cloud Success Center. It is a great resource, a one-stop shop for all of your cloud resources, including expert-led videos, prerequisite checklists, build guides, and this is something that we're constantly updating, so you're always going to have the latest and greatest version there. So definitely be sure to check that out if you haven't already. And, of course, this is the ACE that you're attending today is part of a monthly series, so be sure to sign up for next month. We always rotate the topic and the panelists, but feel free to bring any cloud questions that you have each month as they come to you. So next month will be on content collaboration. So you can go ahead and register there. And this is also the same link that you'll use to see any of the previous recordings if you want to see a library of all of our past ACE meetups. All right, so now the part that you all have been waiting for. Joining Tamara on our expert panel today, we have Oscar Day, who is a product manager, Victor Damasio, a solutions architect, and finally, Molly Tandon, a principal escalation engineer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into the questions.
All right, first up we have, let's send this one over to Victor. What is the difference between cloud-enabled FAS and the on-premises FAS?
Okay, with that, basically the on-premises FAS is supported by your storefront server, and FAS and storefront servers need to be joined to the same Active Directory domain as the VDA in order for the FAS to request an authentication certificate on behalf of that user. So with the cloud, what's happening is basically the cloud-enabled FAS, it's the same FAS infrastructure being used on-site, but a trust relationship with Citrix Cloud, workspace instead of storefront in this case, has been set up. So really what's new with the cloud is that the cloud trust of the FAS service instead of storefront.
And also, can I add to this question? We also redesigned the UI. So if you're familiar with the regular on-premises FAS, the UI is kind of outdated. So we redesigned the UI. It looks much more cleaner. The flows are meant to be more friendly for the admin, so they understand what they need to do and what's going on. The key difference is just the use of a cloud rule. You'll be able to use both on-premises FAS and the cloud side of FAS at the same time. So one FAS server can be used for both. You just need an on-premise rule and a cloud rule.
All right, perfect. Next one we'll send over to Malloy. So I'm unable to connect Citrix Cloud to Azure AD. What are the possible reasons for this failure?
So from a troubleshooting standpoint, there are a couple of things we need to verify to ensure we are able to connect Citrix Cloud to Azure AD. But the number one reason which we have seen is around the user not having the proper permissions to create that link to Azure AD. The requirement is the user must be a global admin in Azure AD, so we can connect Citrix Cloud to the Azure AD tenant. Now, why global admin? Because global admin is one of the master roles in Azure, which is allowed to create delegated administrative rights. So based on the product design, the number one place or the number one reason to look for is and ensure the user has the proper global admin rights to connect to Azure AD.
All right, perfect. So now we're going to send one over to Oscar. When does the gateway as IDP tech preview go live?
So for this item, we are currently in public tech preview. The current tentative date for full GA release is August 28th. Now, why is that? That is when the next gateway release occurs. So the next 13.0 is set for August 28th, and then the next 12.1 is about like a week or so later. It's sometime early September. So then to be able to use the Gateway IDP feature in this GA capacity, you'll need those two latest versions that are coming out, either the 13.0 that comes out August 28th or the 12.1 that comes out early September. So that's the current go-live plan for that feature.
All right, perfect. Next up, going to Tamara. Second authentication, this isn't really necessarily a question format, but second authentication prompt at the VDA publish screen when using AAD with Workspace.
So this is something we have actually tried to solve with the cloud-enabled FAS, so the Federated Authentication Service that we spoke about during the presentation would take care of this double prompt that you're seeing. Keep in mind that this cloud-enabled FAS preview is also going to help you if you're using Octa or Gateway, really any federated IDP, and that will take care of that double logon prompt. So.
Just to add to that a little bit, we're currently in private tech preview. If you would like to join this preview, you can reach out to me, oscar.day@citrix.com, and with an org ID, name of the customer, contact address, just with some basic details about the account, and I can help get on the early adoption list.
Awesome. All right, perfect. So next up for Malloy, users are from a particular AD domain are unable to authenticate to Workspace. We have a complex on-prem AD setup with several AD forests. Again, I don't really know if that's a question, but can you take that one, Malloy?
Sure. So in order to authenticate users from your Active Directory, the first thing we need to do is make sure that domain, your Active Directory domain, is linked with Citrix Cloud. Now, this part is done with the help of a microservice, which is deployed via Cloud Connectors in the customer's domain. Now, talking about a complex environment, if you have, let's say, multiple Active Directory forests, we need to ensure that every forest have at least one Cloud Connectors, or I would say at least two for, again, load balancing and fault tolerance. So the job of the connector or the Cloud Connector is basically to discover the Active Directory information and link that information to Citrix Cloud. Once that's been established, that's where, again, the users can authenticate to Citrix Cloud. Now, something to keep in mind is if you have a complex Active Directory setup where, let's say, you have a forest A and forest B, the Cloud Connector have to be installed in each forest. The reason being because Cloud Connectors cannot traverse forest level trust. So even if you have like a two-way trust between the two Active Directory forests, Cloud Connectors from forest A cannot see the domain from forest B, regardless of what kind of trust you have between the two domain or the two forests.
All right, perfect. So going back to Victor, is there a requirement for FAS support?
Okay, so in order to implement FAS, you have to have a FAS server in the same location with your VDA resources, and you have to have a certificate authority set up, and then do a little bit of certificate work, setting up the templates for the authentication and authorizing the FAS server to request certificates for the user on behalf of the user to authenticate to the VDA. That's it.
All right, easy peasy. All right, so next up, going back to Tamara, what are the requirements to use AAD Connect?
Sure. So in order for you to use AAD Connect, something that was previously an issue is that you had to have a property for your administrator's email address. This had to be set in the email field, but this is no longer the case. A little known feature has been released, and now you're able to actually type the address yourself and send the invite, which admins can just accept just as any other regular invite once they get it on their email. The rest are mostly related to Azure. So for instance, you must have an Azure AD tenant. You can add and verify your domain or domains in Azure AD. And also for more than 500,000 objects in Azure AD, you need to have a valid license, whether it's in Office 365, Azure AD Basic, Azure AD Premium, Enterprise Mobility, and Security. So for more details on this, you can visit Microsoft official documentation on this topic. But this is broadly what the requirements would be for this type of configuration. So.
All right, so next one is a little long, so I'll try to break it down, but this one will go to Oscar. So when will the Citrix Gateway Service in the Citrix Cloud be able to differentiate between internal and external traffic in Citrix Workspace? And I think there's a little bit more of a breakdown. Currently, the Citrix Gateway Service in the Citrix Cloud cannot differentiate between internal traffic.
Sorry, my mute. Yeah, sorry, my thing was on mute. So for this item, about being able to distinguish between internal and external networks, there's currently under development. It's in tech preview. The base framework that enables this use case. So it's called the Network Location Service. And this network location service within Citrix Cloud enables a couple of different use cases. One of them includes the internal-external network for authentication purposes. So if you're outside of the network, prompt for 2FA. If you're inside the network, then don't prompt. So then there's also like optimal gateway routing, so you don't go over the internet when there's a bunch of different use cases there. So that base framework is currently in tech preview. The authentication portion has not been plugged in yet. The plan is once that location service is ready, then we'll plug it in after that. So I don't have any exact timelines on that. It's likely to be something like first half next year, as it's not ready for this development cycle that's occurring right now. But I don't have any dates to commit to. In the meantime, there are some alternatives if you would like to enable this use case. You can use any of the federated identity providers that you can have conditional policies. You can use the on-premises gateway feature and set that up there. So there's a bunch of different alternatives, but native support is still, we're working our way there.
All right. Perfect. So going back to Samana, which auth methods does Citrix Cloud support without any additional hardware, and which ones are supported with hardware?
So without additional hardware, we have traditional Active Directory, which is the on-premises Active Directory, sort of, the default authentication method. We also have AD Plus token. This is the time-based one-time password that I covered in the presentation. And we also have Azure AD and even Octa, which is in preview right now, if you're already using it as an IDP. As far as authentication methods that require hardware, this would be an ADC or formerly a NetScaler. So you could use Gateway as an IDP to basically leverage any IDPs that you currently have configured as part of your ADC. And as long as this is bound to a AAA virtual server and you create the OAuth policy profile and bind the certificate globally, you should be able to use this feature. So keep in mind that AAA might not be part of your license, depending on your license type for ADC, but if you have this included, then you can use it right away. So that would be that.
All right, great. So going to Malloy, we have published resources to a set of users via security groups on the delivery group. Users can authenticate using Azure AD but do not see the published apps. If we assign published apps directly to the user, it works fine.
Yeah, so again, the number one reason for an issue like this would revolve around the object SID or the security identifier. Now, the requirement for the Citrix Cloud is that the security principal, which can be a user or a group, must be created in an Active Directory domain services. So we can assign an attribute called the SID, which gives basically a unique value to the object. So there are a couple of things which can happen here. One, if the groups that we have assigned on the delivery group, if these groups were created in Azure portal and not in Active Directory domain services, it is not going to work. The reason being because when you create an object like a user or a group directly in Azure, we do not get the SID. What we basically get is an object ID, and we need SID for, this is a requirement again for it to work. The other reason could be the group SID is not being synced to Azure AD. So when you have an on-premises Active Directory, you would use a tool called Azure AD Connect to sync your on-prem identity to the cloud, which is going to be Azure AD. But at times, the group syncing might not be happening, or maybe it was not configured correctly in the AD Connect tool. So the first place to look for clues and start troubleshooting an issue like this is, one, make sure the object is created in Active Directory domain services, and then two, make sure the group SID is being synced to Azure AD.
All right, perfect. So moving to Victor, what are some common issues encountered with FAS?
Okay, so one real common one is if a user sees the error message, the request is not supported. And this is when they're during their logon, during the Windows single sign-on. This is because the domain controller that the VDA hit during the logon process doesn't have a domain controller authentication certificate on it for the CA that's issuing the certs for the user. If you look through the event logs on your domain controllers for event ID 19, that will be logged. And usually what happens is, maybe you've added another domain controller to your environment, but you forgot to update, it with a certificate or add it into the FAS configuration. So really common to run into that one.
All right, so go back to Malloy. So we use Azure ADDS that is synced to Azure AD. We also have a custom domain that are designated as primary logon UPNs in Azure. However, users are unable to log on to Workspace using custom domain.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a known design limitation, I would say, in our current version of Citrix Cloud. The workaround or the supported method would be is to use the logon UPN for the user, the default logon UPN, which was used to create or link Azure domain services to Citrix Cloud. Now this might change, so I don't have much visibility again if we're going to be supporting custom domains in the future or not. But as of now, this is kind of like a known limitation where you cannot use custom domains with Azure ADDS.
All right, so moving back to Oscar, since a little bit longer, so bear with me. So I'm trying to implement Octa Authentication for Workspace in Citrix Cloud. It almost completely works except that it does not log onto the VDA. it stops at the logon screen of the VDA. If you choose Other User and log on with the same user you brokered with, it will sign on OK. This is very similar to setting up. Okay, yeah, I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah, it's long, so I can just talk to it. So there seems to be an issue here. I'm not sure if from the rest of the text there, if you are also on the FAS tech preview. It looks like you are on Winstead PC on the private tech preview for Octa. So then if you are using FAS, there is that exact button that you're referring to where you have to go into Workspace Config under the Auth tab. And right under Octa, there's going to be a button that says Enable FAS. So if you're using that, then you'll have to click Enable FAS. Now, for the issue, if that continues, there may be something wrong with your mappings there of how the users map. We can look into it further. If you reach out to me, Oscar.day at Citrix, or the person who requested a tech preview for you, which I have listed as John Yost, reach out to one of us, and then I'll get some engineering engagement to go look at it deeper.
All right, perfect. Next up for Victor, for a federal government customer, would you recommend FAS in Azure Government Cloud if storefront remains on-prem?
If the storefront server is still on-prem, I would suggest putting FAS on-prem with it, because most likely your certificate server is on-prem, and you're going to be configuring storefront via a PowerShell commandlet, to authorize the FAS server to request, user authentication certificates on behalf of the user. So I would rather keep all of that in one location. You probably could run it across, an express route from Azure, but I would suggest not going that route.
All right. So back to Samara. Which features/services are sold on Citrix Cloud that might mitigate my need for one of these physical appliances?
So if you don't want to have a physical appliance such as an ADC, you would be able to use multi-factor authentication by means of Active Directory Plus token. This is a good option for admins that don't really want to acquire additional hardware or invest in an IDP. Other than that, if you wish to use a different type of authentication method, AAD does not require additional hardware in that sense if you already have an Azure account and infrastructure configured as well. So there are a few options here and there that would help you with that. We also have the Citrix Gateway service that will basically eliminate the need for you to have an ADC appliance if you're not looking to do a lot of very complex features that would be actually covered by an ADC physical appliance.
All right, perfect. So going back to Malloy, can I use single sign-on with Azure AD authentication?
So when you're using Azure AD for authentication, what we are offering is basically a federated sign-in and not exactly a single sign-on. And that's the reason when the users log into the cloud workspace and when they try to do the app launch, they see the second authentication prompt. So this is by design. Now you can work around this by implementing FAS, where again the FAS can achieve a single sign-on and things like that. But pure Azure AD, this is by design.
All right. So for Victor, is there a way to see when the validity period of the FAS RA certificate ends?
Yes, there is. It's stored under in a registry key, basically under the HKey users. Can't give the path, but I can put this. Can answer this on after the fact. But basically, it's in the My Certificates store. And so if you were to export it from that HK user key, an easy way to view it is to import it into your HK local machine and then just open up the cert manager, cert LMMSC. Then you can view it and see what the expiration is. Unfortunately, it's not something that's displayed through the GUI, but yeah, if you dig deeper, you can get to that information.
Okay, perfect. So looks like we have just one question left, so last chance to go ahead and put them in before we wrap it up. And the final question here is, how do I participate in the tech preview? That sounds like a perfect question for Oscar.
Hey, my mute was on, sorry. So then, how do you participate in the tech preview? So for all of these items that we've talked about today, we perform a particular rollout methodology for them. And first, we develop it, we do our internal testing, we validate that all the proper flows work as according. Then we go to what's called a private tech preview. During this phase, it's very early access. It's kind of like a closed beta that you can request access to get very early on access to the feature. I mean, there may be known limitations or bugs, but you get hands-on with a feature before anybody else does. You'll be able to validate it in your own environment and make sure you're ready to go on day one when it does go live. If there is a bug, you'll be able to provide that feedback to us, and we can make sure to get it in before we go live. You get direct contact with product engineering for any issues. This is because we want to be able to catch anything that comes up. We want to assure quality for the items we deliver to our customers. And with this approach, we're able to validate across a wide range of customer environments. So it's a two-way benefit for this. After that, we go into what's called a public tech preview. This tech preview is available to everybody, and you'll see it in your cloud accounts with a label tech preview. If you go and see for Citrix Gateway, that one is currently in public tech preview. That's why you see it available. And then after we do GA or full production live, if you'd like to get into the private tech preview for any of these items that we talked about today that you don't see an option available in your account, or any future items that we are working to develop, such as the SAML integration or the Google, Admin MFA, all AD Radius, all those other ones, then you can reach out to me again, oscar.day@citrix.com, and I'll add you to the list and work with you on testing it out early.
All right, perfect. So we did have a couple more questions come in. So again, we'll do another last call before we wrap up. So this one we'll send over to Malloy. Can you talk, I think you covered this a little bit, but just maybe expand on the environments with multiple domains?
Sure. So think of domains as your user domains, right? Because the idea is around authentication, right? So if I have a complex Active Directory setup where I have, again, domains and subdomains and child domains, I need to make sure that whatever domain the users live in or reside, they are visible and connected to Citrix Cloud. And as we discussed earlier, this is done with the help of cloud connectors. Now, all you need is, let's say you have a domain A and then there is a domain B, which is a child domain of A. Now, all you need to do is install cloud connectors only in the parent domain, and it will automatically discover all the child domains within that AD forest and connect it to Citrix Cloud. You can verify this by going into the cloud dashboard in one of the tabs. I'm forgetting, I think it's under Identity and Access Management, and then there is a Domains tab. So that's where you can see whatever domains have been connected to Citrix Cloud. Once this part is done, I mean, everything else beyond this is again seamless. So now the users can use Citrix Cloud Services because their domain is linked, and then they can authenticate and launch apps and things like that.
All right. So last question, unless someone has a last minute one that comes on in, but this one we'll send over to Tamara. So do we have plans for MFA support for login into Citrix Cloud Portal?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. We are currently working on adding this feature, which would be Citrix Identity plus a time-based one-time password. So this is already being worked on, and it will be released in the future. We also have, as part of our new features that will be released eventually, a Citrix Cloud AD Administrator, which allows for group support for admin logon. So those are interesting admin features that will be coming out next.
All right. So we do have one question. Kim's in last minute. I just feel like I keep saying this, so no worries. We got plenty of time, so feel free to keep them coming. This one we'll send over to Oscar. So without FAS, will you get a second authentication? Oops. I've lost it actually. Okay, will you get a second authentication window for each time you open another session, or just the first one? And I'll let whoever feels like they can.
My mute thing kept going. So for this, when you use without FAS, then when you launch a new session, then yes, you will have to authenticate again. And then if you're, I think Malloy may also have some more details on this.
Sure. Yeah. So just to elaborate on, So just to elaborate on what Oscar mentioned, right? It depends on the authentication type, right? Whether you are using on-prem AD or Azure AD for authentication. So if it's an on-prem Active Directory for authentication, then there is no second prompt. Again, it's a seamless single sign-on. However, if you are using Azure AD for authentication, for authenticating to Workspace, then yes, you would see the second logon prompt when launching apps or desktops. The reason being because, as I said earlier, like with Azure AD, it's actually a federated sign, and it's not a true single sign-on, and this is by design. So again, if you want to use Azure AD but also want single sign-on, one of the things we can do is bring in FAS in the equation, and then the FAS will basically communicate with Azure AD to provide you with that seamless logon without multiple prompts.
All right. So last, I keep saying last, but we'll just keep them coming. So we have another question. User in domain A trying to access resource that is in domain B. If there is a trust, will this work? What about if no trust?
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at that. So again, when we say domain A and B, are these domain a part of the same Active Directory forest or separate, right? So let's say they are two separate AD forests, right? So this will again kind of goes back to, again, having connectors. And now you need to, again, decide where the users are. Again, let's say you have A and B, right? Now, if your resources are in A, and when I say resources, we're talking about your resources like VDAs and published app, and let's say domain B is where the users are. Now, if you don't have any users in domain A, then technically you don't need a connector in domain A because we are not using domain A for authentication. The only place we need connectors is domain B. So again, I think it depends more on how the Active Directory is set up, what kind of trust relationship we have in a complex AD environment, and that will basically be a deciding factor where and how you want the cloud connectors to be deployed.
All right, perfect. Well, that is a wrap. Still keeping an eye on it in case there's something last second that comes in while I'm doing my closing spiel. But thank you guys all so much, all the panelists, Tamara for being the main presenter, and then everyone for joining. I hope that this was valuable and you got a lot of your questions answered. Be sure to join us next time for the September 8th meetup. It's actually going to be on Wednesday, September 25th, and the topic will be content collaboration. So get those questions ready. Be sure to also check out the registration page. We will have a recording of this along with all of our previous 8th meetups available at the bottom of the registration page. And then we'll also have a blog with the write-up of all the questions that we covered today. So keep an eye out for that and join us next month. Thanks everyone so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.